Hi everyone, welcome to a new episode of Caroline Talks. And today I have the pleasure of speaking with director Luke Salin and writer Kayla Lewis about their debut pilot show, Parked in America. It premiered at the South by Southwest Film Festival. I watched it and enjoyed it, and I had to speak to them about it because it's so good. And so I would just like Kayla and Luke to introduce themselves and just say a little bit about yourselves, about your writing style and your directing, and then we'll get into the show. So Kayla, we'll go with you first.
Hi, I'm Kayla. I just graduated from NYU in May of 2020, as well as Luke. We both graduated together. But so Parked in America was our senior thesis project, and we're so excited to be premiering at South by Southwest this year. So I hope that everybody who has watched it has enjoyed it and connected with it.
And Luke?
Yeah, hi, I'm Luke Salin. I graduated with Kayla too, just this last year, and we're very close friends. We grew up in the Bay Area together, and I don't know, we're pretty young, so that's probably about as detailed as our bio gets. So
yeah, this is just the beginning of where our bio begins. I think.
I think you've done a pretty fantastic job for the beginning of your professional bio, and especially for your first outing, creating a TV show, and I guess you could call it a film project as well. And so Parked in America is about a young Korean girl, I'm guessing she's about 16, 17, depending, who goes to Illinois to stay with her family after a tragedy has occurred in her family, in her family back home in South Korea. And she arrives, and it's an immediate culture shock. To me, I saw it, the intro I thought was pretty interesting because it starts with her talking to her aunt in Korean. And she's talking, and then she talks to her father, and you get immediately sense that something bad has happened, and it's something bad involving her. And when she arrives at the house, she comments on the size of the house, and when she goes in, she asks her aunt, what's the first thing what's your first recommendation for me to fit in to America? And the first thing her aunt suggests is for her to change her name. And I'm like, yo, that's such an interesting thing, because your name is your calling card. It's the first thing to signify your identity. And especially for people of Asian, I would say, ethnicities, and particular people of color from different cultures, your name can tell a lot about where you're from. Like Koreans, South Korean names are very they're very distinct with how they're structured and the names. And her Korean name is Jiyeon Park. And her aunt suggests, okay, you need to change that American name. And I'm like, does she really have to? But then you guys immediately set up this story about assimilation and integration and immigration, but not so much that, but more, I guess, the difference between assimilation and integration. So could you just discuss that, just starting your story from that perspective, and what was your intent making that the first thing that we learn about her?
Yeah, so I suppose the name change, all of my relatives who have come and visited from Korea, and it's like they were only here for vacation, but they would tell me right off the bat, my name is Peter. And I'm just like, I know that's not your name. I know your Korean name. And they're like, nope, I'm Peter, like Peter Parker. And I'm like, got it. So everyone, I think it's just, and it's something that they looked forward to coming over here. It's being, Americanized and living out an American life for a couple weeks. Whereas Jamie or Jiyeon, she doesn't feel that way at all when she's coming here. It's more like she wants to be able to stay herself, but the people around her are pushing her to fit in and mold with this society. So I think, everyone has a different relationship to their name. I think especially Asian Americans, I was very, very ashamed of it when I was really young, because right away kids were making fun of me and saying oh, it's you and me, very funny. Or they would call me yummy, which is also just not fun. So I'm just you know what? I'm never going to tell anyone my middle name ever again. And I didn't for a very long time until NYU, on my roster and on my email. I don't know how, maybe I signed up or something with my middle name attached to something, but everywhere I go, my middle name is on everything at NYU. So I kind of had to you know, really accept that. And now I just like, you know, use it all the time. But it, you know, forced me to confront my issues with my middle name and why I had those problems. So I think we wanted to put that in as well. But yeah.
And Luke?
Yeah, I think like, I mean, growing up here in the Bay Area and then going to New York, and those kind of being two of the more diverse places, at least here in the United States, I feel like we've seen a lot of, you know, teachers or just people in our community who just have had their names mispronounced like all the time. And I think it's honestly just so frequent. But because it's so frequent, I think a lot of people just kind of pass it over as like not a big deal. But really, like it's your name. It's one of the most important parts of your identity, and I think it really affects how, you know, people see you in the world. And I think, you know, being able to just have yourself presented the way that you want to be presented is really important. And it starts with, you know, your name. So yeah, it's tough. And I think, you know, it's not just Asian Americans. Like on my dad's side, my grandfather changed our family name from Skalinsky to Salin because he was worried about, when he was starting his family, how that name would affect how, you know, my father and then the rest of our family would grow up. So it really is common, and it's not just you know, one culture. It's definitely it's all over. So
Yeah, it's a very North American thing, because coming from the Caribbean, like I'm Barbadian, and we have we have people from literally all over the world living in Barbados. I went to school with kids whose parents were like living in Barbados because they transfer for work and whatnot. But then there's also, but we would learn people's names. I went to school with kids who are Hindu, Muslim, Asian, and from all over the world, and like we would learn each other's names. And then I moved to Canada, and suddenly just my simple first name, Carolyn, which is one of the whitest names you could ever hear, and people would still find a problem. People all of a sudden had a problem pronouncing it because they expected me to have, I swear to God, an ethnic name. One of the first times I interviewed for a job here, I was like, my name is Carolyn Hines. And the lady interviewing me, she's like, is there another way to pronounce it? I'm like, what do you mean? It's Carolyn Hines. And she kept mispronouncing. I'm like, it's Carol. I'm like, lady, why? And then someone explained to me that when it comes to us, like people from people of color, like white people, I'll say it straight up, they assume that there has to be some ethnic way to pronounce her name, even if it's not ethnic, quotation marks. And just like you, as you guys explored in the first few minutes, like at her first day at school, the teacher doesn't even bother to try to pronounce it the correct way. He's like, I can't be bothered. And she's like, okay, well, my name is like Jamie Foxx. And I just thought that was super interesting. And the thing is, like, the name doesn't even sound like her Korean name either. It like phonetically is completely different. But it's just like straight off the thing, like when it comes to fitting into North America, we have to change so much about our identities for us to just get by, because like the hassle is almost like a hassle to it's for respect, and it's a hassle to keep reminding people, this is how you say my name, this is how you say my name. But then it also shows they just don't really care sometimes, especially coming from a teacher where he's just like, I can't be bothered, but then he's going talking about Christianity and like, you know, the tenets of the Bible and the Ten Commandments. I'm like, really? Like you don't see the dichotomy between Christianity. But then again, when you talk about like Christianity and how it was spread throughout the world, kind of explains a lot. And so going from that, the next part that I found is really interesting with Jion or Jamie is her interactions with her family. So this is her first time in America, and immediately we know that she and Eli don't get along. And I just thought that's interesting because they're the same age, and he's her family, and he knows that she's coming from whatever difficult situation. He doesn't know exactly, but he kind of sees her as infringing on his space as an outsider. So could you just tell me about their story there? For in the first episode, I think you guys did a fantastic job, like bridging the gap and the space between their relationship. At the beginning, they're like not enemies, but they just don't get along. But then at the end, he starts to make a movement towards her to become more friendly. So can you just tell me about building that? Because so much I think of the story, like I hope you guys get a full series, because so much of the story is going to hinge on their relationship, and whether they stay close or not is going to make or break, I think, the entire story.
Right. Their relationship is extremely important just because we don't have a clear antagonist in the story. Like there's not a bully or any, well, there's just like small microaggressions, but there's not like one person that's like clearly evil. And so we had to ride the line of kind of making Eli this kind of antagonist, more like an anti-hero type of character, who's just struggling with a lot of his own personal things. And I think the last thing he needed is someone who's also extremely struggling to enter on his life, and he has to feel, or his parents kind of make him feel responsible for this person when they're at school. And Eli's like, well, great. I'm literally like trying to like ace my SATs. I'm trying to stay on top of my schoolwork and also this cross country thing that I'm doing. Like I have a million things on my mind. And the last thing I need is this girl who I don't know that well, who is going to draw attention to me even more than is already on me. So I think, but once Eli kind of finds out more about her situation, he can understand that she is feeling a lot of the similar things that he is, in terms of feeling like the odd one out, and that, they work better if they work together rather than, butt heads all the time. But I feel like, going forward, they're not always going to get along. That's at least not my intention. Because like they might still be on like a same page for a bit at the end of the pilot. But I think now that Jamie has learned more about Eli that he didn't want anyone to know, there's going to be a lot more tension. So they're definitely not like buds forever now. So I'll say that.
Yeah. And I mean, I think like from the beginning, Kayla and I talked about how we wanted all the characters to be likable in some sense, or that you could see that their motivations, they were all trying to do something that they thought was good. But it just might not necessarily have been going about it the right way, or their interests might have conflicted. So, but then also just the fact that all these young people, they're all high schoolers, and you can't really kind of blame them. You don't want to make them, all villains, because maybe in some cases they just need to grow up a little bit.
Yeah, the thing that you Kayla mentioned, he's not an anti-hero, but he is a bit of a jerk at the beginning, and my first instinct was be like, dude, just relax. just chill out. She's in a new place, she's trying to fit in. But then as you Luke mentioned, he also is dealing with his own things that he's insecure about and things that he's trying to keep secret. And I think like for your casting of them, Jeff Lawless, who plays Eli, and Judy Song, who plays Jion, I think their dynamic works really well, because he's very charming, and him being naturally charming helps you to get past the initial any dislike that you may have for him in the beginning. And for Judy, she's very I think she does the, what's the word I'm looking for? She feels uncomfortable, and like you can sympathize with that, because there are ways that actors can perform a role where if they're uncomfortable, it makes you feel uncomfortable too, and not in a good way. Not that you're empathize with them, but you just don't feel comfortable. But she creates empathy in the audience. So I think you guys did a brilliant job casting these characters. So could you tell me a little bit about going through the casting process for this project? Because because you have almost the cast, I think, is equally half Asian and half white. So just how did you go about casting them, and what was it about each person for the roles, including the extended family, like the aunt and Halimuni? Like what was it about their performances that made you select them?
Luke, do you want to start?
Yeah, well, because it was quite a process. I think it was one of the more difficult parts of getting this made, because we knew since Kayla and I are both biracial, we wanted to have a biracial family in it. And also just because story-wise that would create more tension. But yeah, it was really hard to find for Eli people who were half Asian to audition, and then for him to look like his younger sister, so to find someone else at that age, and then to find kind of two parents that looked like them. But I'll jump back over to Jamie first. We spent a long time looking for Jamie, and we saw a lot of people, and it was tough because I think when you read the script, it can read, or especially Jamie can read as very standoffish, especially at the beginning when she's in the classroom trying to change her name or deciding to change her name. Speaking to that discomfort, it's, there's a very thin line between knowing what that uncomfortable feeling is and then knowing how the feelings that you have going inside, processing all of these microaggressions and the trauma that you're feeling, how that then gets presented to the world. Because, she's new, so she's kind of shy, but she's also strong and she will face these problems that she's going to be dealt with. So there were very few people who could balance all those things. And so we were very lucky to find Judy, who she herself, when she was younger, she had come to the US to go to school. And so she had been through that already. So she had grown up in Korea and then she went through the process. So in some ways it was just total luck.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with like everything that Luke was saying, especially about Judy, because in our script, like Jamie can read kind of angry, I think. And that's how a lot of people that we saw read Jamie. And I got kind of nervous. I was like, oh God, are people going to hate this character? Mm-hmm. And then we saw Judy come in and she brought this kind of like youthful vulnerability to the character that I think is really, really necessary so that we can root for this character, because she's going through a really, really hard time at a very young age, coming to a brand new place. And I think, you're not going to be ready to bite someone's head off when they make a small jab at you. I think that's someone who's like maybe more mature would handle it that way. But someone who's 16, I think, would not be ready for that. Or at least in my opinion, there's probably people like that out there. But so Judy was incredible. And we were so, so lucky to have her. And Jeff, he was the first Eli that we saw. And he immediately blew us away. And we're like, that guy is Eli. Like without even, reading the lines, he's Eli. And so, but the thing that we were worried about was his age. We were like, is Judy going to look too young with him? Or, and so we found out a way to, if we dressed him in a certain way and put his hair down, because he usually has his hair kind of up, he looks younger. So it worked out. Thank God it worked out. And they have such amazing chemistry together. And I think they're friends as well. At least on set, we were all a good, happy family. So I think we had just, as a crew and a cast together, we just had this great bonding over this project. So, yeah.
And touching on the fact that Judy is Korean, like she was born in South Korea and she moved to America. There's a moment like that I had to pause and question. It was like, that doesn't make sense to me. But then I had to really think about it. And this is when she was at the school and she was asked about her accent. And she said she went to an international school. And I was like, okay, I know there's like a lot of international schools in South Korea and they do teach like English immersion courses and like they're all like English immersion. But I was like, but then shouldn't she still have some kind of inflection or some kind of accent when she's speaking English, because she does have an American accent. And so I to be sure, I was like, maybe I'm being too judgy. So I asked a friend of mine who lives in South Korea and she teaches South Korean culture academically. And so she explained to me that when it comes to the school, like they do such heavy immersion, like they are taught to speak without their Korean accents, because I told her, but she still speaks Korean at home with her dad, and he like she'll be speaking with a Korean accent, because I was thinking from my own way that I can turn my accent and my dialect off. When I'm home, when I'm talking to my sister, my full dialect comes on. When I'm at work, I don't speak with any like Bajan inflection at all, because if I do, like, people can't understand me because I speak super fast and my accent is super heavy. But then she was like, but that's how they're trained. They're taught that from early, especially if they went to school from young. So I wanted to ask you about that and about like your research into that, because I just thought that was interesting. I thought it was just an interesting way to just teach a little bit about the South Korean education system in particular.
Right. I think that is a question that a lot of people had, is about Jamie's accent and her language barrier. And, and when we found Judy, that's just how she speaks in English. And I think what I really dislike about Hollywood and how they treat Asian characters is that they make them fake an accent in order to further exoticize Asian people. And I think, I'm like, if this is just how Judy speaks, I'm not going to force her to like play it up. You know what I mean? And I think, especially since Judy herself like went to international school, and she went to international school in Jeju Island in Korea until, she came to college. So I'm like, well, if that's how she speaks, that's how she speaks. And I'm just like, yeah, I think that's what and I know that a lot of people, including me, sometimes people will ask me like, do you speak English before they speak to me? And I'm like, I'm literally white. I'm half white. I grew up here. So I think, yeah, it's just that people have this very, they have an expectation of how Asian people are supposed to be. And I think the media feeds into that with this, with all of the over exaggerated accents, especially in things like 16 Candles, and even going all the way back to like Mickey Rooney's, impressions of Asian people. I think I wanted to kind of put an end to that. And if that's even okay, but
well, yeah. We have a story specifically about the accent because our script supervisor and editor, our friend Haesung Kim, she sat in on auditions with us to make sure that, Haesung is from Korea, so she has a better sense of exactly what someone should sound like when they're speaking both in Korean and in English. And one thing that Haesung picked up on for Judy was that she spoke in English and Korean, both in the way how you pick kind of what tone you speak in for Korean, and also just how she spoke in English. She spoke like she was from Korea, and she wasn't just a Korean American, because we did see a lot of Korean Americans who, could have learned Korean or English first, but just the way that they spoke both, there was just a very clear difference. And so I hope that, other Korean viewers of Parked in America will also pick up on those very small details. I'm sure it's tougher without like a side-by-side comparison, but I think that just the authenticity made it, seamless.
No, I understand me, because when she is speaking Korean, her intonation changes, and there is a slight inflection, because I know like for the different provinces and the different cities, there's different dialects. So like a Seoul dialect is different to like a Jeju Island dialect, or for a Busan's dialect. So there is a inflection to the way she speaks her Korean. So that's why when she spoke English, I was looking for the same inflection in the English. So that's why it kind of threw me off a bit. But like as you guys said, that's how Judy speaks, and it does lend an authenticity about it, because I find for North American media in particular, even Kayla, you mentioned how they make Asians over exaggerate their accents, but the thing is like a lot of the accents still sound pretty similar, and there isn't like a, you know what I mean, like sometimes like there isn't, especially if the person isn't, for instance, if they get like a Chinese actor to play a Korean character, they somehow sound like they're speaking with a Chinese accent. And this does happen in Hollywood, where they do cast interethnically, where you have an actor from one ethnicity playing a character of a different ethnicity. And like for me, I sometimes take great offense when you have like Caribbean characters, and everyone's supposed to sound, and everyone somehow magically sounds in this boss Jamaican accent. I'm like, each island has their own dialect, each island has their own accent. Please learn it, get it right. And so I kind of relate to what you guys are saying about having the authenticity with the accent and the dialect. when she's doing it. And going on from that, there is they kind of like is exemplified in two characters. So there's the aunt, and then there's Harmony, the grandmother, and you kind of have these two differentiating opinions about being South Korean in America. The aunt is about assimilation. She wants Jamie to fit in, and she like even at dinner, she had the husband who's white is cooking dinner, and he's making like microwave dinners, and that's perfectly fine with her. And she even says like kimchi doesn't go back with what he's making. And I'm like, my immediate reaction was literally the same as someone. I'm like, kimchi goes with everything. What are you talking about? And then Harmony was like the one that's telling Jiyeon, like, you don't have to change your identity. You don't have to change who you are to fit in here. You can just be who you are. And I thought it was interesting to have these two women with these two differing opinions about being Asian in America. So can you tell me about not only these two characters, like with regards to building them and casting them again, but also just like creating the script and the dialogue? Because I imagine that maybe you've had these kind of conversations with your own family members or friends.
A lot of it is kind of based on what I've overheard and been a part of in my own family. My mom's mom lives only like 5 minutes away, 10 minutes away by drive. So we see her a lot. And my mom, she moved here with her family from Korea in the 1980s. I think it's 1980 specifically. And my mom now, she's very Americanized, and she came here when she was 13. She hardly has an accent anymore, as far as I'm concerned. I don't hear one, but maybe that's just because I've grown up with her. Maybe she does, and I just cannot process it. But yeah, and she's very much like, one with American culture, whereas my grandmother is not so much that way. And so I kind of, and it's not that my grandma has ever encouraged me to disregard American culture, but she's just been more of a touchstone to my culture for me specifically, because just all the food that she makes and the way she talks about Korea, it just, it's a lot more tangible from her. Whereas my mom is this more Asian American identity that I can also grab hold on to. But also my mom still makes Korean food all the time and everything. So Emma is more of an exaggeration of what I think assimilation can be like. And so I just kind of wanted to have those two different perspectives in the show. So Jamie can have those two people to look to in terms of what she wants and how she wants to approach living here. And I think, she doesn't necessarily choose or think that one is better than the other in terms of their views, but she's taking both into account and making her own way in this world and using both of their advice. So, yeah.
Yeah. And Luke, can you talk a bit about the casting for them? Because I love these two women. I think the actresses are great, and I can't wait to see more from them, especially for their interactions, because you can tell there is a bit of tension between mother and daughter. So could you just tell me about casting them? And because you're casting for the pilot, but you're also casting with the intent that the show is picked up and that you would be using the same cast. So can you just tell me specifically about casting them and their chemistry and their dynamic?
Yeah. Well, Judy Han was the first person we saw. So it was the first time we were kind of hearing the script be vocalized by anybody. And so we were very unprepared that day. So we're lucky that she was willing to come back. And we had her meet with Mihwa, who was actually the only person who auditioned for Harmony. So we got very lucky, I think, in both situations, honestly, with every member of the cast. So, but when we had these group auditions, we could just immediately see, as we moved groups in and out, just who felt like they bonded together with the best. And then even like outside of just the scene, just how they would get along, or just the natural kind of way that they would interact. Like, I think just for the whole crew, not just, Emma or Jamie as characters, but Mihwa was like, kind of a mother to us all, and certainly, helped guide us for different scenes, or for what would be the best way to kind of represent a certain situation. So yeah, I think they're both just so wise, and they bring their own individual personalities to their characters. And yeah, it just truly is just luck that we got two actresses that could understand exactly who they were. And same with Jamie as Judy. It's just we're just very lucky. We're just very lucky.
Yeah, and the thing with this, I think that's going to be really interesting with the show is like the focal point is going to be Jamie's relationship with Eli. But I have to mention these two women again, because very rarely when we get shows about, I guess you could say, about the relationship of people of color to living in North America, it's usually just like, for instance, the main character's relationship to that. But but for Jamie, she's going to have her grandmother and her aunt. And I just think it's interesting that we're going to have these three perspectives about these three perspectives of women of color, in particular, Asian women of color living in North America, because that perspective is very specific. And I just think it's just beautiful that we're going to have that, because this is something that we need more of, not only for Asian American representation, but I think also for just like representation for women of color in particular, because we need to have more of these kind of stories and these kind of relationships on screen. And that's what I'm really hoping the show gets picked up, because let's face it, North American TV when you do have Asian characters, a lot of them are still kind of stereotyped, or like when it comes to women, like they're not fully realized characters, and there's not a lot of depth to them. And I would say the last one that I know of is Joan Watson, played by Lucy Liu in the Sherlock adaptation. And for my one part, I don't think we've had such a deep character like her. So if that your show gets picked up, we'll have three now. And for the two of you, could you tell me a bit about what this show means to you personally, not only as Asian Americans, but as creators, and having it show at a festival like South by Southwest?
I mean, yeah. And I also want to just like second everything you said about Asian women and their portrayals in media, just because everyone that in my community, we've grown up, seeing a certain type of Asian woman in TV and film, whether that's, Cho Chang, or who just cries about boys, or just like, when people, I don't know why all of a sudden my mind has gone blank, but it's just like the tropes of like the lotus flower or the dragon lady, and just like the over sexualized versions of these women. I think I wanted to, first of all, just not do that, but portray people as they are and as human as we are, and not as objects of someone else. It's, just these people existing on their own. I feel like I'm wording this in a terrible way, but but yeah, they're just not in relation to someone else, but they are their own person, if that makes sense, with their own complexities, fully fleshed out. And I guess in terms of creating and being able to go to South by Southwest, I mean, we just made what we wanted to see, I think, and what we haven't seen so far. I think there's in these past couple of years, there's been a great, like surgence of Asian American content that I think is really, really incredible. And now I think we can be a part of that, which is amazing. But being able to debut this at South by Southwest is a dream come true, just because we were students when we made this. A lot of student films don't really get to go to festivals as big as this, so we weren't expecting this, to be frank. And so to have this opportunity to get all these eyes on it is just mind-blowing. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I need to just before Luke comes, I think there's something I need to say for my own peace of mind. When I say there's been a lack of Asian characters, I'm not discounting shows. This is just for like the listeners too. I'm not discounting shows like Kim's Convenience, or what was the show by Mindy Kaling?
Never Have I Ever.
Yes, that one. And also, if you're looking at like films, we're gonna look at To All the Boys I've Loved and that series. But when I look at those kind of shows, still when you really look at the female characters, sometimes like it was only in the last film, like for To All the Boys, we really got to know who Lara Jean is apart from her relationship with Peter. And I'm like, we gotta wait 2.5 films to finally get to know who Lara Jean is away from her desire for Peter. Like, come on. And even then with like Kim's Convenience, keeping it 100, a lot of especially the younger daughters, blanking on her name, the daughter, a lot of her storyline is centers around relationship around men too. And I'm like, can we not do this? Like, there's for female relationships in general, like we are not everything that for women, everything in our lives does not revolve around men. And I think we need to have more characters, I think, like Jamie, where a lot of the drama, because we're watching it for the drama too, comes from her own relationship with her own family and comes from her own struggles as a person. And I think that's just very important. I just felt I needed to say that just to like not discount like other shows or films with like Asian characters. Sorry.
Right, totally. And that's like those shows are definitely the things I'm talking about with these like, you know, shows that are coming out, especially in the past few years. It's just, you know, in 10 years ago, it's a completely different story. And that's how we grew up, you know, with those type of things. And I'm so happy for people that are young now that are growing up with these things, and hopefully they feel a little more empowered and that they can be who they are without feeling these stereotypes just weighing down on them. But anyway, Luke was going to say stuff.
Yeah, no, I think, no, just to add on, I mean, there's so many, this project and this process and being here at South by Southwest, I think has made both Kayla and I feel lots of things, especially with what's going on in the world right now. So, but I think first and foremost, I think we just feel like such a sense of validation right now. You know, not only just being young people wanting to have a show about young people who are treated seriously and not, you know, like over dramatized or hypersexualized. They're just young people and these are their problems. And it feels good to have that validated as, yes, this is true. This is something that's real. And then, and that their stories, you know, are worthy of, you know, praise. And then also just for, I think, Asian media, you know, with Parasite winning so many Oscars last year, Minari being nominated so many times this year, and then shows like Never Have I Ever and, you know, Kim's Convenience all finding audiences. I think it shows that the entertainment world and just our world at large is coming together, hopefully, you know, a little bit more. I think there's also proof of that not happening in the world. But I think my hope is that, you know, I feel like the music industry is bridging too. And so with film and television, also just people getting over, you know, the subtitle 1-inch wall and finding more content to love and appreciate. You know, I think like that's just the biggest dream, and for us to be hopefully a small part of that, and hopefully to continue to be a part of that, that's, you know, what would mean the most to us for sure. Yeah.
And there's two particular storylines in the show that I think touches on that, and I think is one of the most important things when it comes to like representation on screen. And it has to do with the type of stories being told, and it has to do with real life situations. And in fact, like we're like, there is the mention of suicide. Like the reason that Jamie goes to America is because her sister tried to commit suicide. And you're talking about how this particular story affects Jamie, like her own mental and emotional state is a concern, and it's about how these things that happen in family affects their siblings or their parents or whatever, and she has to deal with guilt and all of this. And I think it's important that we talk about mental health for in the younger communities, because usually they're the ones that get kind of left out in the cold, and we don't talk about them on first, until something drastic happens. And I think it's important. I just think it's great that the two of you are creating a project that does deal with things like mental health and sexuality and the LGBTQ community, because these are things that are stigmatized not only in Asian communities, but I think in a lot of ethnic communities as well. And sometimes as people of color, like growing up, like from when I was younger, these were things that weren't really talked about. And now I would say in the last, I wouldn't even say 10, the last probably 5 years, thanks mostly in part to social media, like we are getting more discussions about these kind of topics in ethnic communities. Like that's where Twitter being the hellscape that it is, you do have a reprieve where people are able to talk about these things. And I think it's great that you guys are doing this in your show as well, because this creates the visibility for especially young Asian women and young Asian men to talk about these situations. So can you just tell me about the importance of that for you guys, and also about the sensitivity needed to address these in the show, so that because you have to tread a very thin line with regards to these kind of stories, because you have to make sure that they're dealt with sensitively, and that's not a word, that they're dealt with care and consideration.
Yeah. I mean, that part of the pilot specifically was inspired by something that had happened to me personally. And so I knew those feelings of guilt and just grieving very, very well. And I had written it a few months after that had happened. So I was still, all those feelings were very fresh. But at the same time, I wanted to, as you said, treat suicide and mental health with respect and not exploit it as a means to get Jamie's story begun. Like her processing is not just, or this event is not just to get her here. It's going to carry her through the rest of this season, this through line of her processing her trauma and how she feels about mental health and her family's, there's just so much shame surrounding suicide, I feel like, in both the American society and Korean society, that people just don't want to talk about it. And once you kind of get a little close to it, people get uncomfortable and they just kind of pretend that it doesn't exist, and they don't want to talk about it at all. So I think, and that's extremely dangerous, just because when people are in vulnerable situations like this, they need to feel like they can reach out and talk to someone about it. And, when there's just so much shame, what do you do when you feel like, when you feel really awful and that you don't want to live anymore? Where do you go when no one wants to talk about it? So I think these kinds of shows, hopefully will get the conversation at least, started. But I mean, there's definitely conversations going on about it. And I think, mental health awareness, like, I think there's like a month and there's like suicide prevention. Like the conversation has begun, but I just wanted to, that still feels like very much like it's just not in media. And I feel like a lot of people learn from media as much as weird as that may sound. We learn about ourselves through narrative, and about the human condition through narrative. So I think it's a kind of a deft way to kind of introduce these problems that people are sometimes shying away from. So I hope that that it comes across that we're being careful and respectful, and treating these issues with care. But yeah.
And Luke?
Yeah, it's tough. It really is important to talk about kind of things that get, I think, treated as taboo often. The show was originally written as a comedy, and then if Kayla can explain at some point, but she decided to shift to something more drama focused, and something that could touch on what had recently happened to her. And at first, even I was kind of hesitant to that, being part of the story, because I've had, I think, a lot of friends with mental health struggles as well. And, it's hard. And then when you see it, I think in film school, kind of one of the tropes, unfortunately, is that students will make kind of these films about, like suicide or like partying. And it's just really, people frequently do it wrong. And I mean, even in mainstream media, I think, and not to throw anybody under the bus, but to kind of throw somebody under the bus with 13 Reasons Why, it's a show that's very focused on suicide and trauma in your high school years. And it really misses the mark. And so it's hard. It's tough to, talk about these things in media because you can so easily do it wrong. And even in real life, it can be hard to talk about. You can so easily do it wrong. So, but it is important to talk about. And I think, as Kayla touched on, there is a lot of culture of shame, both here in the United States and more so, I think, in Korea. So it's really important to touch on these things, but also to focus on the wider narrative, I think, which we're able to do in parts, and show how it affects different aspects of your life. And I think hopefully also show that there is still joy ahead. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's important too that sorry.
No. I it's okay.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess it was important to me that we didn't have the main character be the one who is contemplating or attempting suicide, just because I know what it feels like to be on the other side, and I could speak to my experience, but I could never assume, what someone else is going through that feels like that. And I don't want to disrespect anyone who is going through that, and treat it in a way because I think suicide is often glamorized in media, and so, which is extremely dangerous as well. And so, I wanted to speak from my own experience, and also, like, we never show the suicide attempt. We never, touch any of that. It's all about the feelings, which I think is what's important, and feeling like you should. And one of Jamie's problems is that she doesn't feel like she can speak about her feelings. And I think that's, probably what happened with her sister, is that like she didn't know how to speak about it. And so that's mainly what what we are trying to do with this, is like being able to reach out, or encouraging people to reach out when you feel awful.
Yeah, no, I think you guys did it well, because like from my own personal experiences, there is, when you're on both sides, there's this, for like Jamie, I think she's doing, for her, it's the guilt. And then when you think about it, is like, if her family doesn't talk to her, and if they don't get hashed this out, it can also become a problem for her, and she might very well end up in the same situation that her sister's in, because she's feeling extremely isolated, and she's feeling alone, and she's in this new country, and she's with family where she's trying to find her own spot to fit in. And then she's isolated in America, and then she's pushed away from home in South Korea, and then there's taking in the whole cultural aspect of how mental health in South Korea is not handled, because culturally it's something that is very taboo to talk about. It's only now they're finally addressing it more publicly, and it's only now that they're willing to admit that this is a problem in the society, and mental health is nothing to stigmatize, and it's nothing to be ashamed of. But for her, and it's still a reality, because she's in that situation. She's thinking about herself. She's thinking about herself as a person, and not the wider scale of how it is culturally. And so, are there any plans to explore that side of it from the South Korea aspect, like with the sister and with the family? Are there any plans? And I'm speaking this into being for you guys and being extremely positive, that like to explore it from that part of her relationship with her family.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, in the broader plans, I would hope to have an episode that is Korea-based. So either that's in flashback of kind of explaining what exactly happened. Not that I would ever show the suicide attempt, as I said, but kind of going over the climate in her family around mental health and how open they are with each other, and kind of exploring more of the Korean society and how mental health is treated over there. So it's definitely in the cards, but whether or not we get to actually do it is the question, but for sure.
Yeah, and I know we're running a little bit long, so I'm going to give you guys, we're going to wrap it up soon. So before I ask my last question, my second to last question has to do, again, with this, but also from the aspect of Eli, because he's in a situation where he also is feeling isolated. He's feeling like he can't connect to his family. And I don't know if this will be a spoiler, but because I kind of guessed it early up in the show, that it has to do with his sexuality. And he is, do you guys mind if I mention it? Would you consider a spoiler?
Yeah, you can go ahead.
Okay, so like he's gay, and he's a young gay man discovering his sexuality. But not only does he have to deal with that, but he's also, and for me, I'm assuming that he's also thinking of what that means for him culturally, because again, when you think about South Korean society, like homosexuality and members of the LGBTQ plus community are again marginalized in the society. So for me, I was wondering if he was thinking about that. Even though he's never been to South Korea, he's probably thinking, what will my family in South Korea think if this comes out? And now he's thinking, because he has to do with his harmony and he has to do with his mother. And now Jamie is in this space too. And he's thinking, I have to deal with, because I think he's also Asian in North America. So he's thinking of all these things like racism, homophobia and that kind of thing. So could you just tell me about including that part into the story as well?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if Eli would necessarily be thinking that far in terms of his family in South Korea, just because he doesn't know Jamie that well. So I'm assuming, I mean, things may change as development goes on, but I'm assuming he's not very close with them either. I think it's more just like the people who are immediately in his life, and, probably his grandmother for sure, his harmony. He's, worried about what she might say, and what his father is a Sunday school teacher. So there's that religious aspect as well. And his parents, they're so open, but from what I've heard from friends of mine who are in the LGBT community, and I'm like, your parents are like so liberal and they're so down, I don't know why you're scared to come out, but they're like, no, you just don't know how they're going to react, you may think that as an outsider, but you don't live in my body in this family, and you don't know what it feels like to have to reveal this part of yourself to the people who have raised you. And I'm like, yeah, you're absolutely right. I don't know how that feels. So I think, and I wanted to kind of bring that, and there's just, I think with men as well, there's just a lot of toxic masculinity. And I think that we need to deconstruct that a little bit. And I think Eli, and on top of internalized homophobia, has to deal with this masculinity issue as well, just in terms of, how's it going to look if I come out? Am I not going to be seen as much of a man, And I think, because there's just I'm so fascinated by young men in terms of what they feel like they can and cannot say to each other, and in their relationships, because girls are, at least in my experience, we're so open with each other about almost everything. I'll literally cry in the bathroom to a random girl if I'm having a really bad night. But I think men they're so, at least from what I've gathered, I'm not a man, but from what I've seen, typically it's just that they're so, it must be feeling so, they must feel so suffocated sometimes, because you can't, at least it sucks, not being able to say how you feel, because it will make you look less masculine. And it's just, it must be like a cage. And I just kind of want to explore that a little bit from a female perspective. But yeah, I went off on a tangent, but yeah.
This is the perfect segue for Luke to give us his opinions on this, not only as a man, but also as the director and directing these scenes with Jeff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. I feel like I could, there's different points where I think as a writer, director, or just any creative person, you can insert yourself into the stories that you are telling. And certainly I think relate to so many of the characters that Kayla wrote. But definitely Eli, I think, and I can relate very closely to Jeff too. I think both Jeff and I, and Eli as a character, I think we've tried really hard, our whole lives to kind of be at least what we think a good person who would be likable, like who would be masculine enough, but would also, I don't know, be able to navigate so many different things, that just your identity as a man and your identity as who you are, like ethnically and culturally. And I think, at least in part, I think that kind of mindset creates a lot of erasure of who Eli is. He's in this majority white Catholic high school, and he doesn't have any really connection to his culture other than through his mom, who I think is more on the end of kind of assimilating to America. And then, his grandmother, who, they're not quite as close as maybe they could be. So, and then with his father and Catholic school, and, I think there's a lot of Christian guilt about what kind of, what a masculine man is. And if you're not that, what are you? And so, yeah, he's clearly experiencing a lot of that. And I think, I don't know, it's really hard. It's hard to talk about. I mean, it's something that I think you have to work through. So I don't know. It is really complicated. Yeah, I'm kind of losing my words. It's hard. It's hard to talk about, for sure.
No, I get it. And I guess this is where, as a filmmaker, and also for you, Kayla, as a writer, the creative process is a way also for you to kind of like work through and figure out the answers to the questions that you have. Because sometimes I think for a lot of filmmakers, like when I was speaking to some recently for this festival, included, for them, a lot of them have questions at the beginning of their projects, and like they find the answers through the process. And I guess using the show as an analogy, it's not complete yet. You're only the first part. So you guys are young. Like I'm 37, I'm going to be 38. Yeah. And I still don't have everything figured out. I started film criticism, going on 4.5 years now. And I changed from doing paralegal studies, got my diploma, and decided I'm going to pursue film criticism. So like, no matter how old we are, we don't have all the answers to all the questions. And then new questions keep popping up. So like, I think that's the part of life. And I think that's also brilliant aspect of filmmaking, because it allows us to tap into things that we haven't thought about, and help us to see things in new ways, and help us to figure out what it is we want to do. And I think that's for the show, like even just while you were talking, the show title, Parks in America, kind of made me think, when you're parked, that means you left from one destination and you're going somewhere else. You're in a temporary place. You're preparing to leave. And for me, based on what you're saying, it sounds, you're parked. You guys are not figuring out who you are going to be as creators. Like, as you said at the beginning, you're not beginning your bios as creators. Like, your bio is like a paragraph. And by the time you guys go on 10, 15 more years, you're going to have 2 full pages. So I just think I don't think right now you don't have to have all the answers. And I think that's just beautiful, because I think life would be boring if we had all the answers, because that means there's nothing new to discover, and there's nothing new to enjoy, and there's nothing new to surprise us.
It was very beautifully said.
Thank you. And I think that's the beautiful way to wrap up the show and wrap up this episode, because honestly, I want to thank you honestly for this show, because I'm Black, I'm a woman, and like, none of the characters look like me, but one of the things I love about film and television is we can always find ways and things to connect to the characters, and we can always see parts of ourselves in the characters. As I mentioned, I personally have kind of like similar situations to Jamie, on multiple levels, and I think your show is going to be is going to do that for so many people, and that's why I'm being extremely positive. I really hope that you guys are able to find a home for this on a platform, Netflix. Better, because you have a wider platform and it's more international. But yeah, I just want to thank you guys for speaking to me, and congratulations on a successful debut at South by Southwest.
Thank you so much. It was a great conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And so this is where I'll officially wrap up the show, but I'll do my kind of things after. So is there anything that you guys want to say just before we close off?
What should we say, Luke?
I don't know. I mean, I think this is where people would probably be like, you can kind of hopefully keep, yeah, we hope you liked it. And, we hope that you can follow along with us in hopes that there might be more coming soon. And I think we're like at Parked in America Show on kind of all social platforms.
Yeah, I think we're at Parked in America Show on Instagram, and then we're at Parked in America on Twitter. So, yes. Yeah, find us.
I'll in the show notes and everything, I'll provide links. I'll provide links to the website and everything. Again, thank you so much for speaking to me. This has been such a joy.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's so great to talk to you. And just thank you for taking the time to watch the show and have all this great, analysis about it. It feels very meaningful to know that people are responding, even people who, don't look like exactly or have the same experience as the characters in the show. So it means a lot.